Kyle Rosenkrantz is back in the studio. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So this is like not what you wanted. I mean, what you wanted and what the governor pushed for, and I think what the Senate Republicans pushed for, was raising the cap, which would have added more schools to the pool of charters. This is like, I likened it to switching deck chairs around on the Titanic. It is, sort of, right?
Well, except we're doing a great job and we're not sinking.
Right, no iceberg yet. Got it. Okay. How does it work?
Well, so for us, the way we measure success or failure is based on the impact on the families that we care deeply about. In New York City, that's 55,000 kids on wait lists. What this would do is allow 50 more charters to open in New York City. If you look at where they would be once they enroll all their kids, that could be over 20,000 seats in charter schools. So while this is not what we would want, like the governor said, I would like to cure cancer too.
Yeah.
I would like to eliminate the cap. But we're making progress. We made progress last year. We made more progress again this year. Charters will grow. And as long as we keep that up, that's the right thing for New York.
Okay, so my understanding in the way that it would work is that charters that have closed, their chartering paper or permission would be reissued effectively for new schools.
That's right.
And there's 22 of them?
That's correct.
Okay, and then subsequently there's a couple from upstate, which is not even near its cap, which get moved down into New York City. And then where are the rest of them coming from?
Well, there were 24 existing that belonged solely to the State Board of Regents. What they did was say the next 50, all of the remaining charters, all 180 that are now left under the cap, will be available to any of the two authorizers, the Board of Regents or the SUNY Charter Schools Institute. So what they did was open that up so that authorizers can approve based on the quality of the applicants they receive, not necessarily an arbitrary allotment.
Right, so that's actually a good thing. I mean, what you were ultimately trying to do was erase the regional boundary, if you will, between downstate and upstate, and you didn't quite get there, but it seems like you're moving in that direction. I mean, people at least are open to your way of thinking.
Right, and this is a temporary fix. It ensures that the growth we've seen in the charter sector in New York City and upstate will continue for at least another year. And that's the most important thing. We can revisit if we need to grow again and keep up the momentum. We can revisit next year. We can revisit the year after that.
You wanted capital also, is that right? And that's another thing that I imagine that we're going to be talking about next year as well.
That's right, and that was more of a budget conversation at the time. There was the Senate One-House budget proposal for the second year in a row had proposed giving charter students equal access to the same billions of dollars in state building aid that all other public schools receive. That once the charter issues really fell out of the budget compromise, so did these funding type issues. Two things there though. One, our facilities funding lawsuit amongst upstate families just scored a pretty important victory where the state tried to dismiss it and the court ruled against the state. So we're going to continue that litigation.
It's coming out of Buffalo.
Buffalo and Rochester families.
Yep.
So that's going to continue, and we'll be working with lawmakers on addressing this in next year's state budget.
Okay, so we have to reiterate, because I think that people get mixed up and there's a lot of like rhetoric flying around. Charters are publicly funded. They are non-traditional public schools. Okay, so we had a lot of stuff, including last night, flying around about public schools versus non-public schools and the education tax credit, which would have benefited non-public schools, which means private and parochial. Not charters, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so, we hear a lot about, and we heard from the progressive panel that we had on last night, this was a big victory, defeating the education tax credit, because, the deep-pocketed hedge fund billionaire types who wanted to kill public education to help private education, a lot of those people are actually charter school supporters, those folks that they are demonizing. But the education tax credit wouldn't have impacted charters at all.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So I think that there's a lot getting mixed up in there. I mean, there's $250 million that's going to parochial and private schools, and none of that is going to charters.
That's correct. And in many ways, a consolation prize for not getting tax credit-based scholarships.
Right.
And the whole thing's disappointing to me. At the end of the day, we're trying to create more choices for parents. Parents want them. Poll after poll shows that we want more charter schools. The waitlist numbers show that they want them. And here we have people who claim to stick up for the little guy, who claim to stick up for the poor, basically dancing on the grave of a proposal that would extend scholarships to poor kids. That makes no sense to me.
Well, but their focus is that the tax credit also benefits people who are wealthy and can afford to give contributions to benefit kids who then subsequently use the scholarship funds to go to school.
But in no other context does a donation-based scholarship, does it get maligned like this one does? Scholarships for kids to go to college. Nobody is attacking them as sort of tools to dismantle public education, but for some reason, if it applies to K-12, it's suddenly a vast right-wing conspiracy. And that's not fair. This is about charity. And so if we want to incentivize charity, you create a tax credit. It's already a deductible donation. So while the issue isn't really sort of first on the list of our members, we are about choice, and it was disappointing to see it die in the way that it did.
Generally speaking, though, I mean, you're doing pretty well in terms of having champions in Albany, and the governor certainly is a charter school champion. He's come to it in recent years. Last year was, a massive fight because it was Bill de Blasio versus Governor Cuomo on charters and co-location and Success Academy, et cetera. This year was not so much that. It was more focused on education tax credit, though the Bill de Blasio piece was in the mix. And do you think that that helps you or hurts you? And also, are you looking forward, because next year's an election year, and your other champions in Albany are the Senate Republicans, and they're going to be fighting like crazy. And how are you going to react to that? Because they want to stay in the majority.
Right. And so a few things there. One, we have to applaud all the state leaders for delivering on this deal, from Governor Cuomo, Majority Leader Flanagan, and Speaker Hastie. And on let me speak on the Republican side first.
Okay.
There's a lot of misinformation out there. We counted half of the Senate Republicans have charter families in their district. So there's been a lot of conversation about how charters aren't really relevant to the Senate majority. That's actually not true. We have folks from Syracuse, we have folks from Rochester, folks from Hempstead, all with charter families, and these are senators that care deeply about school choice. And then on the Assembly side, I mean, those 55,000 families on waitlist I mentioned, they're mostly in Assembly Democrat districts. And I think in the spirit of compromise that ultimately emerged yesterday, Speaker Hastie understood that, and he was hearing from people who do care about charter schools.
Well, he was personally a supporter of charter schools when he was just a rank and file member.
That's
he also
right.
was, as I've said before, a sponsor of the education tax
That's right.
credit. But then when he became leader, he sort of had to take his name off everything and start listening to the many instead of just representing his own personal interests and the interests of his own district's constituents.
Right, but I think, at the end of the day, he does have to represent his conference. But he has a lot of folks in his conference that are also open-minded on the charter school issue. And that's why I was really heartened to see the compromise that emerged, because while there were a few loud voices within that conference that were ideologically opposed to charter schools, the folks who really have to engage with parents who are just looking for an option, they want a great school, they don't care who runs it, those are the folks we can compromise with.
So this is the time that everyone sort of regroups and looks back and says, well, we got this, we didn't get this, et cetera. And then starts to say, well, okay, now we need to look forward. Unfortunately, this is a never-ending cycle. So what is it that you are looking for, do you think, in the next time around? I mean, obviously we'll speak again before January, I hope. But what do you see coming down the pike?
Well, I think the biggest issue for the charter sector statewide in New York is this funding question. So, and really funding equity. When they created the charter law, the premise was when a kid goes to the charter school, the funding for that student follows them to the charter school, with some exceptions and caveats and political compromises.
Right.
But what happened, the end result was not enough of that money is actually reaching the charter school. So what we're trying to do is fix the formula that funds charter schools in a way that there's greater equity there. And one of the biggest drivers of that inequity is the fact that capital funding, funding for school buildings, doesn't follow the student.
So do you think then we're going to re-litigate the cap question, or is the focus going to shift back to the capital funding question?
We'll have to see where the supply and demand for new charter schools is. If there are 50 new charter schools for New York City within the next few cycles, we may run up against that cap in 1 year.
Right.
But that being said, I think these funding questions are sort of systemic and long-term. And while we've seen progress, and hats off to the Senate for trying to make progress in that through the state budget this year, and the governor has been focused on this issue as well, these are the systemic problems that we're going to have to revisit budget after budget until we fix this formula.
Well, we'll talk again. Until then, I hope you have a vacation planned, or
Yes.
at least some time off. I thank you so much, Kyle, for coming in.
Thank you.